Hey writers, you're listening to the Kobo Writing Life podcast, where we bring you insights and inspiration for growing your self-publishing business. We're your hosts. I'm Joni, author engagement specialist at Kobo Writing Life.
And I'm Rachel, author engagement coordinator at Kobo Writing Life.
On today's episode, we are interviewing Cassandra Alexander, who is a registered nurse in the ICU and a writer of paranormal romance. She's recently published a memoir, The Year of the Nurse, which details her year, 18 months of working as a COVID nurse in the US.
Before we get into this episode, we do just want to give you a content warning. This episode does discuss, as Joni said, working in the ICU as a COVID nurse. There's a lot of discussion about COVID-19 and mental health issues, including PTSD, depression, and suicidal thoughts. It is a very interesting conversation. We had a great time talking to Cassandra, even though the subject matter was pretty heavy, and we really hope you listen and enjoy.
So we are here today with Cassandra Alexander, who is a registered nurse who is also an author of paranormal romance. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So we really wanted to talk to you about your recently published memoir, which is about your time working throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. Can you start by telling our listeners a little bit about you and your publishing background?
Yeah, so I always knew I wanted to be a writer. But when I was younger, I couldn't figure out how to make a sustainable wage at that. So I looked around for alternative careers of things that I might be interested in doing. And I found nursing because I'm very interested in like science and the medical side of things. And nursing allowed me to work part-time in the Bay Area, which is amazing, and have free time to write. So going into nursing like 15 years ago was a very calculated choice in an effort to kind of further my writing career. And then along the way, once I became a nurse, I wrote a 5-book series for St. Martin's, the Edie Spence series, the first one of which was Night Shifted. And that one was about a nurse working on a floor with vampire-exposed humans. And it was very just thinly veiled, me talking about how scary it was to be at night, be a night shift nurse, a new night shift nurse, with all these wild patients that, also with no experience, which made it terrifying on both sides of the bed. And so after I had that traditionally published series, I went into self-publishing for a while, and then I kind of have bobbed in and out of that. And right now I'm working on a series with a friend of mine who also has a nurse protagonist, and it starts with Dragon Called, and we're going to be taking that wide very shortly here, I think at the end of this month. Just because I enjoy writing about nurses, and I feel like there's a lot of inherent drama in nursing and taking care of other people. So along the way, my career, I've published like 25 books. Not all of them are currently out right now. I'm kind of in the process of refreshing my backlist and rebranding it. But if I count the books that didn't get published, I'm in the 30s for sure. I've always had a habit of writing through things that happened to me, even if I kind of thinly veiled them in fiction. And so last year as a COVID nurse, I had the opportunity to write to a bunch of my friends and tell them what was going on, and express myself on Twitter and tell them what was happening to me, like moment by moment at the bedside, because I just needed somebody to listen. And then I have like an author brand, so to speak. And so I would send out newsletters, basically imploring people who read my books to please wear masks and please take the vaccine. And so at the end of that, when I collated everything up, I had quite a bit of material. And so that's kind of how The Year of the Nurse was born, because I thought it might be interesting for other people to see what it was like to be bedside last year, like way up close and personal. I hide nothing.
Yeah, Rach and I had to debrief this morning after reading it. It's a lot. It's a lot of information. And even for us, like we were saying that we had, like neither of us had COVID, like we had a very like easy pandemic, and it was still like reliving every minute of that and all the news cycles that were happening. It's a lot. So how did you find it going through your old tweets and your old journal entries?
Yeah. No, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm glad you guys said you're going to put a content warning on this episode, because people keep telling me, oh, this is a heavy book. And I'm like, I know, and I'm sorry.
It's a heavy thing.
It's kind of a sipping book, not a gulping book. I wanted people to feel the immediacy of the moment. And that's one of the reasons why I didn't pull any punches, and why I pretty much put up straight journal entries in there about how I was feeling. Author's note, hugely depressed most of the time, not happy to be at work, and not happy to feel like I was going to die every day. It was it wasn't kind of a miserable experience. It was a very miserable experience in hindsight. But, people always kind of want to say, oh, I had an easy pandemic. But I want to steer people away from that line of thinking, because the pandemic's, before I get back to your question, Joni, but like the pandemic super sucked for like all of us, like all of our lives were interrupted in ways large and small. And so I never want it to become like a pissing competition about whose life sucked more. Like, yeah, mine was pretty sucky, but we were all on that roller coaster together. And so I just want everybody who's listening to grant themselves some grace for like what they experienced in 2020 and what they've probably gone through so far in 2021, because none of us had a choice and we were all on the ride. But back to kind of what it was like, I feel like at the time, nobody had any time to process anything. There was like so much nonsense, at least in America, happening literally all the time. Bad decisions being made, politicians lying to us. It was just a fire hose of BS, basically. And that was one of the reasons why in the book, I put in some news tweets about, like death tolls or stupid things that Trump had said, or things that had happened nationally, to kind of frame that year so that people would get the chance to remember that we had actually, at least in America, been through all of that stuff together, because it was just, such a blur when it actually happened.
That's one thing that Joni and I kept messaging each other while we were reading, was like, I completely forgot that Trump had told people to drink bleach, essentially. Like, and just all of the like small, like at the time they weren't small, but all the little things that happened that like were placeholders and markers throughout the pandemic that we had just let our brains forget. So it was interesting to be reliving it, the news cycle again. It was a lot.
Yeah, just indignity really cool. After indignity.
Yeah.
A lot of it was very early. Like there were things that were happening in April 2020, and I was like, whoa, like we had no idea back then that we were still going to be in this. And yeah, there was all this, oh, we're going to open by Easter. Like, it's wild.
We were told to take 2 weeks at home. Like, we'll see you in 2 weeks. And that was, 18 months ago?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not sure what the response is, like if you guys had a more cogent national response up in Canada, because I could barely keep track of the ball on our side of the fence. But yeah, just that lack of people wanting to be proactive and getting out ahead of things, and just keeping us trapped in like this reactive state to COVID. And that's kind of how we are still. That's one of the things I find frustrating right now, kind of with the Biden administration, is we're still reacting to COVID instead of being hugely proactive. Because I feel like as long as we're reactive, then, and just hoping that states over here do the right thing and put in mask mandates and vaccine mandates, that we're always going to be witnessing senseless deaths, because people aren't going to necessarily make the right decisions unless they're strong-armed into it, unfortunately. So
yeah, I think it's pretty similar here, that it's still reactive rather than proactive. I did have one question about going through and kind of collating the content of the book for listeners who haven't read it yet. It's a culmination of tweets, newsletters, journal entries. How did you decide what to put in the book and what to leave out?
Yeah. So basically it took me like a week or two to just sit there and make like this master document that had everything chronological in there. Real fast, before I talk about that, Rachel, let me talk about why I chose the title. I chose Year of the Nurse, as you guys know, because you read the book, because the World Health Organization designates each year to be a quote unquote year of the something. And ironically, 2020 was Year of the Nurse. And then 2021, we got it redo because it was so bad. So, and now it's like the Year of the Nurse and the midwives, basically. And so that meant that there was like a poster in every break room in, America, in a hospital in America, saying, hey, Year of the Nurse. And you're in there thinking, yeah, right. So once I kind of realized that was going to be my title, and that the only way to make sense of all the material I had was to go chronologically, that's just how I started to break it up. When I started, I was like, oh, let me do all these essays and I'll kind of organize it by body systems and stuff. And I was like, no, there's too much material. That's way too complicated and people will lose track, but people understand like how a calendar flows. And it provides this nice ominous drumbeat of like, oh, early days when we thought things might get better. And then, oh gosh. And like everybody who's already lived through it can like kind of hear the jaws sound as the shark comes up, through the holidays. So as for trying to figure out what I wanted to keep and what I didn't, some stuff was just duplicates. It was easy to kind of toss. Like I would have thoughts and then I would expound within those thoughts, like in maybe in a different format, and I would choose which one was more meaningful. A lot of it was just leaning into my authorial sense of inherent drama and like the story that needed to be told so that it made sense. And I didn't rigorously think that everything necessarily needed a callback, but I tried to not have any piece of information in there just dangling on its own. So I have a couple talks about like, I just bring it up like 3 or 4 times, like GoFundMe's in general. and the kicker for me, having talked about like, hey, it sucks that like we have to use GoFundMe's instead of having national and highest healthcare, is that one thing where I'm all like, hey, by the way, Trump's chief of staff lost a leg to COVID and then had to go run a GoFundMe to like for his own health, because his government and his president wouldn't just dump money on him after having lost a GD leg to COVID. So I tried to kind of like remember to come back and like any note that I had kind of picked out, I wanted to make sure that I hit it maybe one more time in the book if it was appropriate, so that it would kind of just feel resonant and come full circle. And then I just reread it like 12 times, and then probably more actually. And then I had my friends who had seen some of the entries on their own in their own capacities, depending on like how close a friend I was and stuff, go through it and tell me where they thought, this isn't really so interesting, you should take it out, etc. So, and I trusted in them.
What was the process like rereading it over and over again? Was it therapeutic to kind of see it all again? Or by the end, were you ready to just throw everything out the window and never think about it again?
There's always that cycle with every book, right? Like at first you're like, I'm so jazzed, I'm loving this. And then there's like the middle, and then there's like the end. And then there's like 3 months later when you're like, who the hell wrote that? Like you don't even remember the person that you were at the time when that book magically happened. And this was a little bit different than that because, obviously it's nonfiction. So at first, and just so people know, I was writing this as a therapy book. So I wound up starting this book. My therapist knew that I was a writer. And at the end of April, I had like a suicidal crisis at work where I messaged my girls chat where I was like, yo, I don't really want to be here. Why am I keeping people alive if I don't want to be alive personally? And I came home and I started crying. I didn't stop crying for a long time. And my therapist was like, whoa, honey, you have like super PTSD, and which is understandable, right? But because my therapist knew that I was a writer, she was like, oh, you should maybe do something with this. It'll have value for you in and of itself, even if you don't show it to anybody else. And she was right. It gave me the opportunity to process a lot of feelings. And it was hard and scary to go through all that material, but it really helped me to grant the person that I was a lot of grace. I found out through extensive therapy, which I'm still participating in, that a lot of my issues with how last year went down and my participation as being a nurse last year were based on outcomes, right? Because I'm used to being successful. I'm used to being a really fantastic nurse and like doing my best and having things work, And so I need to just shift my frame from the outcomes of my patients to I tried really hard and I did my best, which is all anybody can actually ask of us, especially in these times. And so I got the opportunity going back and looking at my older material to say, oh my gosh, it was clear I was trying my hardest all the time. I was trying to keep my friends alive, trying to keep my family alive. I was trying to keep strangers on the internet alive. I was trying to keep my paranormal romance readers alive. Like I was the definition of trying for all of last year. And so that helped me to realize that I had, even though it feels like all of my efforts last year were wasted, that's not on me. That I stepped up to the plate and I really tried. I'm sorry, I'm going to try not to cry now. I don't have any Kleenex on the couch with me. Oh, wait, I do. Okay.
No,
sorry.
I love that you addressed, well, I don't know what we're going to do with the information, but I'm glad that you addressed mental health and the toll that this is taking on how many healthcare workers, like, I don't know, worldwide. I think it's
an astounding number of us, and people don't think about that. That's why I used that, like right in my intro. I'm like, hey, there were 4 million nurses in America last year and only 2.7 US soldiers in Vietnam. And like soldiers who went to Vietnam, they got breaks, right? Like they got to come home and like be totally off and not be like stuck in it, all the time. Like we were all stewing in all COVID news all the time. And it was almost impossible, especially as a healthcare worker, to step away from that because, it just involved you so vitally. You wanted to be abreast of every situation. And then, globally, there's not a single country that's dodging it. And because by and large, our political situations and our economic situations haven't encouraged proactivity. So, parts of Europe tried their herd immunity experiment, and that didn't go so great. I read this Carnegie report this morning on the situation in Indonesia, which is tragic. And, and then we've got like vaccine doses being wasted in America right now that I wish we could have sent to other places that desperately wanted them. That's like hugely unfair. So I just guarantee you that with the exception of the weird nurses that they keep finding in the New York Times to somehow, or the Wall Street Journal to somehow interview, those freak one-off nurses who are like, I hate vaccines. The rest of us are very interested in our living and our friends' living and everybody else's survival. And so, yeah, this has just been a really heartbreaking period to be bedside.
Yeah. So I think that you've expressed like why you think this is such an important story to tell. I'm interested about your decision to publish it independently, because this is something I think is really cool. And there's a great opportunity offered by indie publishing. So I'd love to hear about what your rationale was for choosing to do that.
Yeah. So having been traditionally published in the past, and obviously I'm embedded in I have plenty of friends who are trad pub and stuff, and I know how slow that system goes. And at the time when I wrote this, I actually wrote, in my intro, as we go into this, our first safe summer, which wound up being a lie, but at the time I thought it was true. I wanted to get my book out there to speak to what healthcare workers had been through this past year, and to let America know what it had done to them, and to let them individually know that they were not alone, that anytime, we've all got PTSD just like crazy. We even the most casual Google test for PTSD, if any nurse took it right now, I'm sure she would ace it. So I wanted to get my book out there as quickly as possible before people forgot, because I thought that was a thing that might happen irrationally. And so the only way that I thought I could do that in time to kind of strike while that iron was hot was self-pub, because, traditionally published books, that whole system is great, but it just takes a while, right? Usually at least 6 months, if not more, to get a book out there. And I'm just like, if I feel like this now, I know there's so many other nurses out there who feel exactly like me. They're underserved, basically. So I just went ahead and I fired up Vellum, and I was like, I think I can make this work. And I paid good money for a good cover, and I have plenty of writing friends to run my blurb by and stuff. And I got everything professionally copy edited. And I sat there and I did the very difficult work of formatting it so it looked sexy, despite the fact that, it's got like journal entries and tweets and everything in there. And I actually really liked having that degree of control over the process, honestly, too, because it was such an intensely personal work. I think it would have been really weird to sign off on it and give it to somebody else. I also curse a lot in it, and I don't want to be unfair to Trad Pub, but I worried that if I had given it to them, they might have wanted to iron some of that out or down a little bit to make it more palatable for people. And I'm not really interested in it being palatable to everyone in America. I just want nurses to feel seen and people who are curious to get a chance to watch. So yeah, that's basically all the reasons why I went self-pub. If Trad Pub rolled up with a truck, or Netflix with a truck of money and offered it to me, if they wanted to put me in every airport in America, I would be like, oh, please, yes. I would have no problem signing away those rights. But, it is what it is right now. And I am reaching nurses. I've got great reviews. And I do wish that I could get an even bigger platform for it, because I know there's more people out there who would find it valuable to read, but I have faith that will come in time.
No, I think the immediacy of it is part of the strength of the book, that it is, well, I want to say recent, but really we're still in the middle of it all. But I thought that was very powerful. And I agree with you that it would have taken a lot more time had you gone the traditional route. I think this is, one of the kind of cool opportunities offered by India is for you to be able to say, this is happening now. This is very important right now. So let's do it. I'm also curious, who are you hoping to reach with the book, and what are you hoping that readers get from it?
Again, I definitely want nurses to feel seen and to know that they weren't alone, because that is the worst. When, as a whole, society doesn't discuss mental health issues in general. I don't know how it is in Canada, but that's how it is in America, right? And then you've got the double whammy. It's born of some weird American exceptionalism and machismo that we've got. And then in healthcare, nobody ever wants to admit that they were wrong. And so, and if you can never admit that you're wrong, it's really hard to admit that things are going on with you inside that maybe other people can't see. But I know from my nurse friends how messed up all of us are. And from nurses on the internet that I encounter, or nurses sobbing in their cars after shift on TikTok. So there's just this huge amount of psychic damage that is being accrued by healthcare workers right now. And so I really wanted people to know, if they're suffering in silence somewhere, that they're not alone, that of course you would have PTSD after everything that had happened to us, like a literal course. It was so funny. And I mentioned this in the book, but I'll repeat it now, Joni. Like when I had that first visit with my therapist, and I hadn't talked to her for like 14 months because she's not in my health system. She had to wedge me in. It was a weird situation. I basically barfed like 14 months of trauma onto her. And it was me telling her all of that where I realized, oh my God, I cannot believe all these things actually happened to me, And I know that I was only in the Bay Area where things weren't as bad as they were in like New York or LA or Florida or Texas now. So yeah, I think there's going to be a desperate need for healthcare workers to be acknowledged in the future, to have therapy in the future, and for America to understand what it's done to us. And then I know too, a lot of people are really, I don't want to say looky-loos because that sounds like I'm putting them down, but people are really curious about what happens, bedside and what it's like. I mean, that's why ER was like the most popular TV show in the world for so long, right? Or Grey's Anatomy, or House. Even though those are fictionalized accounts of what happens in a hospital, they're still interesting. So I was hoping that my book, if people wanted to rubberneck some and see what it was really like, at least for me, my book would give them the opportunity to do that and hopefully make them feel strongly about, being pro-health, pro-public health and pro-masks and everything in the future and voting accordingly. So, yeah, I've gotten a couple freakish, like 1-star reviews of people who didn't like the book. And they were all like, oh, it was too political. And I'm just like, how did you think this book was going to go? Like, it's not a Hallmark channel. So that's who I hope my readers are. And, anybody who's got any form of PTSD, I think would be interested in it. And unfortunately, that's probably like 4 million of us. So.
And I just want to say that if anybody has healthcare workers in their life, you should pick up this book. Just kind of like, I have 4 family members who work in hospitals. I have a bunch of friends who are nurses, and reading this book, like obviously you have empathy for your friends, but just to kind of see and understand what your friends and family are going through, it's wildly eye-opening. And also, I don't know, it changed my perspective on a couple of things. Like anybody who is like, oh, well, you're not wearing a mask, you're not wearing a vaccine, you get sick, like that's on you, blah, blah, blah. I don't care, but you should care because somebody has to take care of these people. So I think that it should be relatively mandatory reading, but that's just me on my little soapbox over here.
It's a great soapbox to be on.
Thank you. I did kind of want to just touch back on what you said about getting a 1-star review saying that the book was too political. You also write paranormal romance and you have other books, like you mentioned up top. Were you worried at all about losing any of that readership based on the content of this book?
I think I edited some of that out. I think there might have been a snippet or two in there where I was sending out newsletters to people and I was just like, please buy my fiction before I piss you off. Because, when you accrete your newsletter list over time, you're promising those people like sexy dragon shifters or werewolves or vampires, and happiness and escape. And yeah, I just took like a hard right. And I was like, I cannot let this audience go. I cannot, if I have the opportunity to help you all make good decisions, no matter where you are, we're going to go down that road. And so it did cost me, like people on my newsletter and stuff, like I would get messages where they'd just be like, the people who couldn't figure out the unsubscribe button who like email you back and they're like, unsubscribe me. And I'm just like, okay, fine. I'm sorry I've crossed the line here, but I refuse to be apologetic, right? There was a time when things were getting real and some doctor said something profound on Twitter, like basically everybody who has a platform right now who isn't telling people to wear masks is leaving lives on the table. And I took that to heart because it's true. Like one of the things that I edited out of this book actually were transcriptions of Instagram videos I made. I'm a really avid gardener and my whole backyard is now covered in plants because every time I had a bad shift, I would order a lot of plants and a lot of my shifts were bad. But one of the things that's really popular on Instagram is unboxing videos. So I would get these massive hauls of plants in, and I would set up my camera and I'd be like, all right, let's unbox plants. And then let me tell you about public health stuff, you know? And so I like cried on camera with that stuff when I found out that my mom had COVID, things like that. And while my Instagram is like all of my plant account, with the exception of these videos, which were still nominally plant related, I need to look back on my life and know that I lived it clean and that I tried as hard as I could. And if that makes some people mad, then it's, you know, too bad for them, right? You know, it's not me worth sullying myself to make myself more palatable to them to take their money. And I feel like there's plenty of people out there too. Like I don't feel like I'm in the minority. So I don't necessarily feel like entirely persecuted for having good public health views. So I don't think it'll cost me that many people. I do suspect too that some of the people that left my newsletter were like, oh my gosh, we're just tired of this lady haranguing us. And that's fine too. Like if you're overwhelmed and, you know, you're already trying to figure out what to do with your 3 kids at home, I'm not going to blame you for like not needing some other weird rando like yelling at you once a month in her newsletter. So, but I did get a bunch of really good comments back, though, on newsletters, and people would send me pictures of their family or say, you know, thanks for keeping my people safe and stuff. So those moments made it all worthwhile.
Yeah, you know, there's going to be people that were on the fence or unsure about things that maybe did get to see your side of it. And that's definitely worth losing a couple of readers that maybe didn't. So,
yeah.
Something I was wondering about, and maybe you kind of explained it when I didn't understand that you had been working part-time, because it really does sound like you were working all the time during last year.
Oh, no, it started off part-time. I'm full-time now.
So you were writing this while you were full-time during what was going on. Plus you were writing your paranormal romance, because that was the part of like, when are you doing this?
I'm a weird person, Joni. So I know if other writers, I'm going to be honest with y'all because I'm honest, but don't hate me. I wrote 400,000 words of fiction last year on top of all the notes and stuff that wound up being put into You're the Nurse. And it was basically because that was like my trauma response, right? Is I just needed to be someplace happy and I needed to kind of dissociate from what my current life was like. And so my way of doing that was to be like, oh yeah, I'm going to write about sexy time man beasts right now. And so I was wildly prolific, more prolific than I have ever been. And that is not indicative of good mental health necessarily. So I wouldn't say that that's the way to get a bunch of words in, is to like be living in your house, have absolutely nothing to do with anybody else in the world, and to be desperate to escape your day-to-day life.
But it was part of what helped you cope.
Yeah, it was 100% a coping mechanism, because I needed to kind of, you know, write the things that wound up being in You're the Nurse just to get them off of my head, you know, because then I would sit there, you know, looking at a page and I'd be like, you know, my brain would be trying to file away whatever today's trauma du jour was. And so I would just like blurt it out into like a journal or onto Twitter, and I'd be like, you know, here's 3 really sad conversations I had to have today. Okay, good. I'm glad those are kind of like out of me now. And then I would go on and write fiction. But like it got to at work when we were lucky enough to have breaks. I always take my laptop into work, and we do 12-hour shifts. So I would write on break at work. Just, it was such an escapist activity for me in a good way that I was really glad that I had it.
I follow a lot of healthcare workers on social media, and I'm really, really grateful to those that have shared information, because that's where I'm getting a lot of it. And it shouldn't be that way, but it is. Like, there's a lot of really, really valuable information that's being shared that isn't necessarily being portrayed in the media. But I'm also in awe that people are able to do that while living their lives and treating people and going through what people have gone through over the last 18 months. So yeah, it's been a valuable public service.
Sometimes I pull away. I'm really good at getting hyper-focused, which definitely helps my word count. And so sometimes, you know, I'll be off of Twitter all day and stuff. And that's kind of good for me to take like a little bit of like a personal break. And I don't really use Facebook at all, which is probably like not good for my career, because I know that's where quote unquote the readers are and stuff. But I just find their setup kind of intolerable. So I'm way more of a Twitter girl.
And on a practical note, I'm interested, how did you find like switching genres the way that you did? Did you use the same editors, cover designers, that kind of thing? Or did you have to find different people to work with because you're working in such a different genre?
Yeah. So I went and did I used the same copy editor. because, copy editing is kind of copy editing. And I knew she was great. But I went and found a person who was like a nonfiction cover designer, because you know how much of a cover cues like what the reader experience is going to be promised by that book. And you want to make sure that the cover matches the interior. So yeah, I used Vita at One Story Creative. She's in South Africa and she was amazing. And I'm really super pleased with that cover. But yeah, so I wouldn't have gone to like my normal PNR person to just have them do that, because it would have had the wrong cues.
I have a question that just came to me right now. It's kind of based on what we were talking about earlier about the advantages of publishing this book independently. The book ends at around July 5th, if I'm remembering correctly. And like you said in the intro, you said we were going into our first like chill COVID less-ish summer, which as we all know is not as COVID-ish less as we wanted it to be. Do you have any plans to possibly add like an epilogue or add another chapter as time goes on? Or have you closed the book on Year of the Nurse and are moving on?
That's like such a great question, Rachel. And I really don't know. I feel like right now I've been out of the game in a good way for me, because after I had my PTSD diagnosis and stuff, I got this summer off. And I didn't necessarily feel bad about taking this summer off because our patient load was really light. And because I live in the Bay Area where everybody has been very good about masking all along, we didn't really have any COVID patients again until kind of just this past month. So I don't know that I would have had that much to talk about this past summer anyways. And then now I accidentally fractured my ankle, and I'll probably actually be out of work for like another 2 to 3 months here, because I just had pretty intensive ankle surgery with screws and a plate and a fake ligament. So I don't want to have to write another book of this. I don't want to have to be that person again who has to write a book like this. I don't want to ever experience the lows that I experienced in this book again, quite frankly. I don't want to sound dramatic and be like, I may not survive them, but like I was really hella depressed for like a really long time, and I cannot let myself go back to that place. I don't necessarily know what my nursing career is going to look for me like after this. I do still want to go back to ICU once my ankle fracture heals up, to get back on the horse and prove to myself that I can do it. But I would be a liar if I said that I saw myself there in 5 or 10 years. And I think that's one of the things I talked about in the book is like this mass exodus we're going to see of experienced nurses, because America's made it untenable for us to continue to care the way we have. And there's just not enough money available to keep us at bedside after the way we were treated last year. And so if I don't write anything more in this series, and I don't want it to be a series, but I want it to be for lack of opportunity. I want it to be because like America got better or I got further away from bedside. I'm unfortunately, as things continue to unfold, I'm sure there's somebody else right now in Texas or Florida who's like in the middle of it, living it. And I would be really glad to hand this baton over to them.
If you don't have an answer to this, that's fine. But if there are any US-based nurses listening right now, are you aware of any resources or anything that people can contact? Is there anything available?
There's not, and it's really sad that there's not. Like, therapy services all over America are super impacted right now. I'm just assuming from having heard from friends attempting desperately to find somebody, and I talked about that some in the book too, how I tried to find somebody through my health insurance and I couldn't, so I'm just continuing to pay out of pocket for my old therapist. So as far as I'm aware, there's not like a national clearinghouse. There are people I've heard, every time I talk about this on Twitter, somebody chirps up and they're like, oh, so-and-so is taking people. But I don't have any way to judge whether those people are like good or not, so I'd feel rude passing along that information. So all I would do is if there were nurses listening to this and seeing themselves in it, I would encourage them to keep looking for care. And that even if you do find a therapist, be aware that, it's just like any other practitioner in your life, be it like a dentist or a yoga person. If for some reason you bounce off the first therapist, try and find another. Don't give up on therapy and getting help just because you may have had one bad experience.
That's a great point. And where can listeners and readers find you online? You're very active on Twitter.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter as Cassie Y4. Or if you look up Cassie Alexander on Twitter, you'll find me, I'm sure. And then I'm at CassieAlexander.com, which is my website, which is like 99% paranormal dragon shifter stuff, and then like 0.1% Year of the Nurse. And that's probably the best and most easiest place to find me.
Perfect. And you're going to be going wide with all your books in the near future. Is that what you said?
Yeah. So I'm redoing my covers on all of my backlist right now, on all of my solo titles. So all of those will be coming out. I'm hoping to get everything released in like October and November. I want to have kind of like a pre-order lead and make things look nice. And then my co-authored titles with my co-author, Kara Lockhart, or she and I, when we write together sometimes as Cassie Lockhart, we're going to be doing all those wide. We're just kind of waiting for the last book to come out of KU, and that will be at the end of this month. So if you do like sexy time dragon shifters with nurse protagonists that have happy endings, then I think you would probably like our Prince of the Otherworld series.
Amazing. Okay, well, we'll make sure we share those links. And do you mind if we finish off with some book questions? We'll try and keep it simple. Do you have a favorite book of all time?
Gosh, that is such a hard question. The 12-year-old version of me wants to tell you that it's Dune. And I'm so hyped for that new movie to come out. So it looks so good. But I honestly, I haven't read Dune in like probably 15 years, but then also that's because I memorized it. So I don't think I have to read it anymore. Or The Star is My Destination. And I'm going to feel really bad for Fritz Leiber, I think is his name, which has some problematic elements today. But for 1950s science fiction, what he did with it at the time was spectacular. And Stars My Destination is kind of a retro choice, but he does a lot of things in there as far as keeping a plot moving quickly, because the books back then were shorter, and keeping things interesting that I really enjoy. So yeah, those are my random choices.
Just on the Dune front, yes, the movie looks phenomenal. And I have a friend who's reading it for the first time right now and is so obsessed she's creating fan art. So everybody should read Dune. Do you have a book or an author that made you want to become a writer?
Well, ironically, probably do. When I was like a kid and I read it. I also read like a ton of Andrew Norton growing up, and like Dragonlance stuff, the old school like Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman back in the day that I've read recently, and I know it doesn't hold up at all. But when you're like again 12, that shit is the bomb. And everything Anne McCaffrey's Pern series. If you're sensing a dragon theme here, that's because there is one. So I think I always enjoyed the transport of books, having books take me away from my current life. Not that my life as a kid was necessarily all that hard or bad, but I just always enjoyed the ability to get someplace else via books. And I think that's one of the reasons why I always wanted to write, is I wanted to give that gift to other people.
And our final question, it doesn't even have to be a book, but do you have a favorite fictional healthcare worker?
Yes, I actually do. I do have a favorite fictional healthcare worker, and you guys are going to laugh, but I'm holding firm. I have a group of girlfriends, and when the pandemic started, we all started watching Voyager, like Star Trek Voyager together. And so we're still going. We watch like 2 episodes a week, and there's so much Star Trek Voyager that we haven't gotten through all of it yet. But I love the Doctor on Star Trek Voyager. He's like he's just an amazing character. He's one of those characters when as a writer, you're like, oh, I would just love to it's like the perfect sidekick. He's like witty and debonair and snarky and sarcastic. And, and every once in a while they give him his own plots. And my birthday this past year, was obviously spent in pandemic times. And my husband actually hunted that actor down on this app called Cameo, and paid him money to shout out me and all of my Voyager watching girlfriends. And he was like, I can't believe that you guys want to hear from like a guy who looks like a middle-aged shoe salesman, but here you are. So yes, the Doctor from Star Trek Voyager is my favorite fictional Doctor.
I'm so glad we asked.
Yeah, and I'm so happy this isn't a video recording, because the way my face lit up when you said Star Trek Voyager does not need to be captured.
So cute.
It's the best Star Trek. Don't fight me on it, but Voyager is the best.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for doing this. This has been really great. I hope lots and lots of people read your book.
Thanks. Yeah, no, this has been super fun. So I appreciate you guys. And I don't want to say surprised. Surprised is the wrong word, and pleased is also the wrong word. But thank you for having read my book prior to this. So I didn't expect that, and that was very nice of you guys. So
I really enjoyed reading it, despite the fact that I did have to walk away and take angry breaks and call my mom a couple times and be like, oh, this is terrible. But yeah, I did really enjoy it. It was really informative. And I think it's important that people do know what's going on.
Cool. Thank you.
It's a big part of history.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Kobo Writing Life podcast. If you are interested in picking up Cassandra's book, The Year of the Nurse, or any of her paranormal romances, we will have links to both in our show notes. If you are enjoying this podcast, please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe. And if you're looking for more tips on growing your self-publishing business, you can find us at kobowritinglife.com. And be sure to follow us on socials. We are at Kobo Writing Life on Facebook and Twitter, and at kobo.writing.life on Instagram.
This episode was produced by Rachel Wharton and Joni DiPlacido. Editing is by Kelly Robotham. Music is provided by Tearjerker, and huge thanks to Cassandra for being our guest today. If you're ready to start your self-publishing journey, sign up for free at kobo.com/writing life. Until then, happy writing.